shop, kind of a lunch place that's owned by the same person who owns the Thirsty Maiden in Canada South. So she's opening a kind of a second shop in Stittsville.
Competition for quitters.
Right across the street. But
that's what I thought. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, competition's a good thing.
We love coffee in Stittsville.
Do we have quorum, Madam Clerk? Okay.
You do.
So good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. Welcome to the Finance and Economic Development Committee meeting for the 7th of September. Before we proceed, I'll do a quick roll call. Conseiller Cloutier.
Présent.
Councillor Derouz. Councillor Elshantiri.
Present.
Councillor Gower.
Here.
Councillor Hubley.
Here.
Councillor Luloff.
Present.
Councillor Moffat. Councillor Suns.
Here.
Councillor Tierney.
Present.
Vice Chair Dudas.
Present.
Great. Well, welcome everyone. Bienvenue. We'll start with the declaration of interest, déclaration d'intérêt. Anyone have a conflict? No, there's Scott joining us. Thank you. Confirmation of minutes for the 6th of July 2021. Adoption de procès verbaux pour le 6 juillet 2021. Carrie?
Okay.
Communications is presented. City Manager's Office, National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, September 30th, beginning 2021. Journée nationale de la vérité et de la réconciliation, 30 septembre. David White has a presentation on that. Does anyone wish to speak to this, or can we carry it because it's federal regulation and it's covered in our collective agreements that if there's a federal holiday, our employees receive that. Does anyone have any questions on it? So on the motion, carried?
Carried.
Thank you. Next is committee, and so I'm sorry, this will go to council tomorrow because of obviously the timeliness factor, because it's September 30th. Item 2, corporate diversity inclusion plan. We have a presentation, so we'll come back to that. Finance and economic development, operating and capital budget, Q2 status. On the motion, carried.
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 Innovative client service department, procurement year in review, 2 recommendations. Any questions? Carried.
Carried.
Item 5, West Carleton Environmental Center Municipal Host Agreement. We have a delegation and members of council. I know Councillors Eli Elshantiri and Flick Gower, among others, would like to speak to that, so we'll hold that. Item 6, Comprehensive Legal Services Report for the period January 1st to June 30th. Rapport général sur les services juridiques pour la période de 1er janvier au 30 juin 2021.
Received
and carried.
Carried.
Next item is 7, Planning, Infrastructure and Economic Development Services, Service de planification de l'infrastructure et de développement économique, sale of 5441 William Lindsay Grove to Sansar Real Estate Investment Corporation in Councillor Derouz's ward. Any questions?
Carried.
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 Item 8, Brownfield grant application 78, 84, 86, and 88 Beechwood, and 69, 73, 77, 81, 85, 89, and 93 Barrett. On the item, carried.
Carried.
Okay, so we'll go back to the item we have our first delegation for, and that is the West Carleton Environmental Center Municipal Host Agreement. I don't know if I think Councillor Elshantiri, as the ward councillor, would like to make some opening remarks, and then we'll ask Councillor Gower, whose ward is also affected, and if Councillor Moffat, as Chair of Environment, has any questions, and then we'll go to the delegation. So Councillor Elshantiri, this is your ward.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, colleagues. Well, Mr. Mayor, let me begin by saying a heartfelt thank you for our staff who negotiated the host agreement. And as we all know, the landfill has received approval from the province many years ago. without any condition, basically. So even the condition the city of Ottawa introduced to the province at the time, we were not successful. But we managed through the site plan approval to make sure our community has been well served and manage expectation. And one of the condition we have at the time was to have a lane exit from the landfill, and that was not recommended. And Waste Management agreed to build that on their own expense. Also, we had one of their conditions from the province was to create a public liaison committee. The public liaison committee made up of the 5 councillors, the West End, Councillor Hubley, Marianne Wilkinson at the time, Shad Kadri, myself, and Councillor Moffat. And obviously, in the last term, we have Councillor Gower and Councillor Sudd joining the PLC. And we didn't have many meetings because at the time, Mr. Mayor, there was not much activity going on in the landfill other than negotiating back and forth with the host agreement. I just want to make it clear, the host agreement, Mr. Mayor, has been on back and forth since 2015. It's almost 6 years now. This is only to talk about what's the host agreement can expect from the company. And I know, Mr. Mayor, some might say, oh, we received that much, we should receive more, we should receive. This is really, you can't compare. We had even an outsourced report from KPMG have comparison with other municipalities. Unfortunately, we cannot name those municipalities because an agreement of confidentiality. But nevertheless, each agreement is different, Mr. Mayor. And some of those agreements, they might receive a little bit more funding for the host agreement per tonnage, but then they committed to give their waste to that specific landfill, which is we don't have in our agreement. Our agreement, the city is free to choose who the waste can receive our residential waste. Obviously, there's 70% of the waste in the city of Ottawa is ICI, which is that's not controlled by the city of Ottawa. Again, I don't want to, make it sound we are pushing. This is the host agreement. It's in it everything we can ask for, and is committed from Waste Management, and also an agreement to make sure the future is. Obviously, we can hold Waste Management feet to the fire. This is where also making sure if we start receiving complaint order or other what we have in 2006, we have we have access to the Minister of Environment, who's already been the company been in front of that tribunal before. So my community, as much as we're not. We're not celebrating to have the largest landfill in the city in our ward, but nevertheless, we try to manage expectation and make sure the company will do the work accordingly with the Minister of the Environment, and making sure the order or the traffic jam we used to see before doesn't happen again. So with that, Mr. Mayor, I'm not sure if any of my colleagues would, but I just want to take this moment to say thank you to one of the PLC meeting who we have lost, passed away after the last meeting in April. Bob was with our committee from day one, and unfortunately passed away after April. Bob Hillary is, I believe, from Canada North, if I'm not mistaken. He's been on the committee from day one, so my heart goes to his family at this time. With that, I'm not sure if my colleague or any of my colleagues, if I miss anything, they would like to add to this. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Gower, would you like to add anything, or then Councillor Moffat?
Yes, if I could. First of all, I think it's important to acknowledge the work that the community has done in reviewing and sharing their comments, both in this municipal host agreement that's in front of us, but going back a number of years. I actually remember meeting with Mr. Harold Moore. It was nearly 8 years ago last week, I guess, that I first met with him and several of the advocates who've been very involved in this file. At that time, he was a resident in West Carleton. I think he's since moved to Canada, but still very active. The work of the Stittsville Village Association. I know one thing that the community has always placed an importance on is making sure that the operation of this landfill is as open and transparent as possible, around the operation of the public liaison committee, around the monitoring and compliance reports, making sure that those are available. And I think the work that as counselors, we need to ensure that we're making the information, that we're ensuring we're doing everything we can to compel waste management, as well as compel our provincial partners to make sure that that information is available to the public. There are a lot of provisions within the environmental approval around monitoring of things like odor, of things of groundwater, but we need to make sure that the public is aware of the results of that monitoring and that there is a accountability around it. I'm going to have some questions for staff on the compensation, but I also just want to note we are with the report recommendations that we direct staff to come back to us with recommendations on how to process accounting around how the compensation money is spent, and that's important as well. I think the previous agreement and previous process for that was not particularly clear to the public, and I think there's some improvements we need there, so that's important as well. Anyways, like I said, I'll have some questions for the applicant and for staff as we go, and looking forward to the discussion today.
Great, thank you. Councillor Moffat, anything before we go to the delegation?
Nothing for me, thank you.
Okay, so I know this project impacts Canada as well, so we'll go to our delegation. Tanya Hine. Tanya, welcome. Nice to see you again. I normally see you at Canada Day,
Yes.
but we haven't been able to touch base on that special event in Stittsville for a couple of years. So thank you for your leadership, and we received also the letter that you sent to us. So the floor is yours for the next 5 minutes.
Thank you. As I said, my name is Tanya Hine, and I'm here representing the Stittsville Village Association, but also as a concerned resident who's really been involved with this effort for most of the last decade. It's been a marathon, and I think a lot of the volunteers, the advocates, we're feeling the strain of this, and it's been such an effort to get the information. Even just with this last draft agreement, I know there are processes for when you're trying to do the negotiations, but it's really felt like a bit of a information void from a public perspective. So I did rush after we found out about the draft last week to submit comments over the long weekend. I did miss the deadline, but I'm glad you did get those. So I'm not going to read them all verbatim. From a community perspective, I wanted to touch on the fact that we know we have to accept the new landfill. As Eli mentioned, we're not happy about it, but it is what it is. It's a reality. But given that it is a reality, what we want now is the maximum community benefit. I remember early in the presentations, there was talk about having community recreation space and state-of-the-art recycling and diversion facilities. And those elements, those community benefits have really been watered down over the course of this process. So we're left with money, and I'd really like to see more of it than what was proposed in the agreement. I'd appreciate also some clarification on how the proposed rates came about. Eli mentioned it, and that there were some, comparables done, but I'd just like a little bit more detail and some clarification about why this particular community's burden is less than the burden other communities face when they have a landfill. It really feels something like haggling to buy a car when, you wonder if you're getting as good a deal as your neighbor, except in this case, the public was really shut out of the consultation and negotiation process. Still with the fees, Glenn mentioned it, but I don't like how the process happened last time. It was really hard for the public to have any kind of input into what projects, might be funded by the funds. And there was really no way for the average resident to sort of look at how much money is available, what's even possible. So right now, the way the agreement is worded, I really don't like that Waste Management has any say in how the community money might be spent. I can understand them not wanting something that goes, contradictory to their business. But it really would be great to have a more transparent and accessible mechanism for residents living with this mountain of garbage in our collective backyards to have more input into the status of the funds and how they are distributed and the projects that they support. Moving on from that, I wanted to talk about the wording in the service area section that states, without the consent of the general manager, planning, infrastructure, and economic development department, or her or his successor, waste management will not dispose at the landfill of any eligible waste other than eligible waste generated within the boundaries of the service area. And then it goes on. I was wondering what circumstances that consent might come into play, like what would happen where waste could be accepted from outside that area. I know there is a wider approval at the provincial level. So I'll leave it there for now. You have the rest of my comments in writing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tanya. Questions to the delegation, Councillor Gower, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thanks, Tanya, for being here today. I want to leave how the compensation is spent out of this conversation, because we're going to be getting a report back next year, and that's when we'll have a chance to review that. But I did want to just touch on what you started with. How should, you mentioned you're not happy with the rate of compensation that is in the contract. So do you have, what would you consider fair, and what would you be basing that on?
I know the CLCLC, a lot of letters there, had made some recommendations for rates that were more around the $5 range or possibly higher than that. That may not be fair. And they looked at other landfills in the province and other places just to kind of get those numbers. They looked at the site and the advantages that it holds for waste management. I think Phil Sweetnam probably sent you some extensive information on that. And so, yeah, there's precedent in the province for a bit higher rate.
And since this is about compensation to address the impact that this landfill has on the community, can you just share with the community, or with the committee rather, historically, what has the impact been on Stittsville in particular?
When you enter the community, if you're coming off the highway, of course, the first thing you see is landfill. It's not a great welcome to the area. Going back a few years, odor was an issue. I live a couple kilometers away from the landfill, and there were several times when we could really smell it in the air. I know people that lived a lot closer or in, kind of the downwind areas, they also suffered from it. So there's a lot of concern, a lot of residual concern, I think, just sort of based on the past performance of landfill in the community. Nobody wants landfill in a residential community in a suburban area. We really need to be focusing more on diversion and moving away from landfill. I don't think it's appropriate to have it in this area where people are living.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Mayor.
Great, thank you. Councillor El-Shantiri, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and Tanya, thank you so much for hanging there with us all these years. I must say it's been a long time. And you mentioned in your remark about Mr. Sweetnam and Jerry Augusta or Harold Moore, also they submit to us their comment. And all those comments, we took them very seriously. And I just wanted to know, we try, and that's why we had asked for other municipality to see what their host agreement is. And I know somebody would say 5, or maybe why not 10, or maybe why not 20. The fact is, no matter how much money you compensate, you're still having a landfill in the middle of suburbia. And that's something we should be focusing on more, and the operational from here on, a lot more than I would say on the compensation, because we checked the compensation, Tanya, with other, and I was very adamant other places, but you can't compare apple and orange, because the comparison was very hard, because every agreement has other condition with it, which is the city was not willing, because the city is in the process to extend the life of the landfill in Trail Road, and we're trying every best we do, recycle, reduce the garbage. So for that reason, we didn't want to enter any contract for the household garbage to go to the CARP landfill. Maybe if we did sign a contract and pay so much per ton, we can get more money on the other end, like some municipality did. But that really, that's not going. What we need from here on to make sure we don't have repeat of what happened in 2006, the order, the traffic jam and other. I think that's what this agreement will focus on those. So
I
I
can
just want to,
appreciate those comments. But it just, from my perspective, yes, we're trying to extend the life of the trail facility and keep Ottawa's garbage there, and we don't have to have that contract. But then we are having this burden of landfill for other communities' garbage. And from a community perspective, I mean, that's even more offensive.
and Tanya, you and I, we agree. We try very hard, and they were granted through the EA from the PROM a long time ago, and we try very hard to negotiate back and forth. And in my opinion, we arrive where we are, but there's no compensation. What I'm trying to say to you is going to make this a sexy thing to have on the entrance of the west end of the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions to the delegation? Thank you very much, Tanya, and thank you for your many years of service on this important issue. I know it was frustrating for us all. None of us wanted to see that landfill expanded, but unfortunately the province overruled us. So thank you for your efforts.
Thank you.
So, questions now to staff. Could I just ask just an opening question, refresh our memory in terms of what role outside the City of Ottawa boundaries garbage will play in this site? I know this was something that Eli and Glenn and Glenn's predecessor certainly fought hard to ensure that there wasn't, Toronto garbage coming to Ottawa. So what are the parameters? Who's going to answer that from staff? I don't know if it's a legal question or a...
Mr. Mayor, I can start. I'm joined by Christine Enter from my office, who has been the lead with respect to this matter. As you may well know, the provincial approval is for allows collection and disposal there across the province. It's actually the host agreement that limits that to areas essentially closer to the City of Ottawa, extending up to Sudbury, but excluding the City of Toronto. But Ms. Enda can provide more specifics in that regard.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The reduced service area was specifically negotiated as part of the host agreement, and it's in place for the entire term of the agreement. It's important to note that. While Waste Management does have a certificate of approval from the ministry for the entire province of Ontario, the city, in its comments back in 2012, 2013, and 2014, they were particularly concerned about the potential for Toronto garbage to come to the City of Ottawa. And therefore, it was specifically negotiated to expressly exclude Toronto area waste. And as a result, if the agreement is executed, there's a reduced service area. And as outlined in the schedule to the draft agreement, that is an area encompassing the municipalities of Sudbury to the northwest, Prescott Russell and the United Counties of Stormont, Dundas, and Glengarry to the east, and Durham, Prince Edward County, and Northumberland to the south.
So nothing from the GTA per se or Toronto?
No, nothing, no waste generated from that particular area.
Yeah, I still think it should be our own garbage in our own site, but obviously that battle has been lost. Okay, Councillor Gower, questions, and then Councillor Hughley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Maybe I'll jump right in. Why is this compensation amount considered fair? What comparables did you use, and how did you end up with this amount that's in the contract?
Mr. Chair, there is no statutory requirement for a host fee, and therefore there's no legislation that outlines an acceptable range for a host fee for a municipality. And so staff has conducted extensive research, including information that's commercially sensitive and was provided to the city on a confidential basis from other municipalities, and information about other landfills in North America generally. It may not be the highest amount that is out there. I know that some residents have advised council members of the Twin Creeks landfill, and that seems to be significantly higher. For a comparison, I will tell you, I'll start off by saying first that each landfill has to be assessed on its own unique characteristics and basis. But for Twin Creeks in particular, I can tell you that that is the municipal landfill for the area, and it services many municipalities in that area, and it is almost triple the amount of tonnage that will be coming into the CARP landfill. So Twin Creeks, while that area does have a county-owned and operated landfill, I believe it's called the Dawn landfill, it's the county uses that Twin Creeks extensively. And for comparison, the CARP landfill is receiving 400,000 tons of fill or waste per year. And Twin Creeks is a landfill that will receive, at the outset of its host agreement, it was receiving 750,000 tons, and that has been increased to 1.4 million tons of waste per year, making it likely one of the largest landfills in the Ontario area, if not in Canada. And so for comparison, as I've said, this landfill has a cap of 400,000 tons. It is significantly lower. And Twin Creeks, as another example, also subsidizes that particular landfill. It is the municipal landfill. And so there are rebates and there are guarantees of municipal waste that go to Twin Creeks in terms of obligations upon the city, in terms of tying up their business arrangements to ensure that the capacity is met on a contracted basis. That obligation does not exist here. This is a pure financial arrangement where the city will receive a host fee, and there are no obligations tying the city to any future business with waste management at this location.
The report mentions, and you mentioned just now, about looking at comparables. So I'm curious why that information wouldn't have been included in the report. Why couldn't we see a range of Ontario landfills, for example?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The information that was provided on Ontario municipalities is commercially sensitive. It was provided to city staff in the course of confidential negotiations, and therefore it cannot be produced because it's not our information to share. One major thing to note is that the City of Ottawa made the commitment to share the entirety of its host agreement with the public for comment, for review, as well as a commitment for public consultation on how that money could be utilized. That report's coming forward in Q1. Many municipalities, while they might share aspects of their host agreements, do not share them publicly in their entirety. And as a result, the City of Ottawa should not disclose confidential information that came to it in the course of commercially sensitive negotiations. It could impact our ability to receive such information and negotiate fairly for the corporate entity of the City of Ottawa in the future.
So we are making this contract public. Other municipalities do not necessarily make their contracts public, and that's why you cannot publish the comparables that were used in this negotiation.
That is correct. Some information may be available publicly through reporting mechanisms, but we are sharing our full contract, including the host fees, and we're also going to be bringing forward a report on the process and criteria for utilizing those funds in Q1 2022.
Okay. The question of service area has already come up a few times. Through the negotiation, staff have achieved a smaller service area than what the provincial approval was for. Was that a factor in the compensation? I'm wondering if a trade-off for accepting garbage from a smaller footprint meant a lower compensation rate for the city in return, because I would think waste management is at a disadvantage from not having a wider service area.
Mr. Mayor, the reduced service area was a major point for the City of Ottawa, and as a result, it did impact our ability to negotiate a significantly higher host fee, simply because they are at a financial disadvantage. They were committed to adhering to the city's concerns. They heard it through the EA process, they heard it through the approval process, and they heard it again during the site plan process. And therefore, given the circumstances surrounding this negotiation, staff felt it was better to hold firm on a reduced service area that includes penalties and audit ability for the service area and the transfer of origin where that waste is generated, rather than an arbitrary amount of $5, $8, $10, $12, because at that point, it's almost nickel and diming as opposed to ensuring there is a reasonable host fee for reasonable trade-offs. Mr. Mayor, you may recall that while this agreement was being negotiated post the zoning amendment, Waste Management applied to accept waste from Quebec, Western Quebec. And as a result of the ongoing negotiations, Waste Management canceled that application and recommitted to the reduced service area for this landfill.
Thank you, Christine. I know it's outside of our ability to direct as a committee, but I do think we should be asking Waste Management to look at amending their EA, their provincial approval, to reduce that service area and reflect what they've agreed to with the city, because it does seem like it's still quite a disconnect between the host municipality agreement and their provincial approval. I have two other questions, and they're about the compensation. What say does Waste Management have in the use of these compensation funds? This is a concern that the Stittsville Village Association has raised.
Mr. Chair, Waste Management wants to ensure that the money from their landfill benefits the community. And therefore, they simply want to be aware of how the city is spending that money. It's my understanding that it's a consultative role only, but that where there are certain initiatives in terms of the community initiative fee that's in the host agreement, they do want people in the community to know that the benefit that they are enjoying is a result of this business in their community. It's my understanding, and they have advised several times, that they want to be good community partners. And while no one wants a landfill in their area, it is a business that does provide jobs and is undertaking development, much like any other industrial business within the CARP corridor.
And it is something we need to make sure is addressed clearly in the report coming to us in the new year around the process. Okay, on the compensation amounts, is there an increase for inflation and or any increases over the term?
There is, Mr. Mayor, there is an inflationary increase within the agreement. It is attached to the report. And that increase is simply to maintain the value of the dollar over the years and the term of the contract. While the landfill is projected, if it fills up very quickly, at 11.4 years, the agreement itself extends over a term of 20 years to ensure that the city is capturing the dynamic nature of a landfill for lean years and years where they reach their maximum tonnage. And so there is an inflationary rate that is included, and that inflationary rate will start on the first day following the end of each 5 contract years increment, and it is to maintain the value of the dollar.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that, because there's a bit of confusion from the public, certainly. Actually, I do have one more question. There have been members of the public who've suggested that our committee and our council should reject this as a way to hold up the operation of the landfill. Because if we don't approve this today, the condition of the site plan is not met and they cannot begin operation. What would be your advice to our committee about taking that approach as a way to further delay the opening of the landfill expansion?
Mr. Mayor, certainly council gets to make its own decision on this. However, the City of Ottawa did establish a condition of site plan approval, the execution of this host agreement. And if the city itself is the obstacle to Waste Management fulfilling that condition, I suspect in light of the years and years it has taken to get to this point, Waste Management could legally challenge the conditions of the site plan in order to pull their development permits and begin work. And at that point, as I said, there's no statutory requirement for a host agreement, and the potential is there for the city to end up with a lesser host agreement or none at all.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Hubley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to thank Councillor Al-Shantiri for his leadership on this committee. I think we've been doing this for like 10 years. And there was quite a few meetings along the way. I think we should also say thanks to all our staff that were involved with this very complex agreement. And also, I see Wayne French is with us from Waste Management. He was the liaison to the committee from the company. And I know personally, I always found him very forthright in what he would share with us when we would ask questions and so on. So I think we need to acknowledge that we arrived at the point we're at because of the cooperation between Eli as our committee chair and Wayne as the co-chair. One of the things I want to add to this discussion is what this landfill was before it was taken over by Waste Management. It was known, anybody like that was in the community back then will recall it was known as the rump dump. And it had no rules around it whatsoever. The resident from Stittsville was talking about the smell. That smell came from waste that had just been deposited and not treated properly there or covered or anything for years and years until Waste Management came in and actually brought best practices in the landfill industry to this location. And that's why you don't hear about the smell anymore. We used to 10 years ago, we don't anymore. So I think that's worth acknowledging that we're dealing with a totally different landfill than what we started with here. And so that's it, Mr. Mayor. I just want to, and also thank Eli for mentioning Bob Hillary, who was on the committee the whole time with us. I actually served with him on the Committee of Adjustment for the City of Canada back in the 90s as well. So I knew him for many years and very sad to hear of his passing. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Hubley. Councillor Moffat, please.
Thanks. Just two quick small things. When we were discussing this in our committee, one of the things I think I asked about, I just want to clarify for public record, is the notion of transfer stations. So the fear of waste coming from outside the zone. Just wanted to confirm that waste could not come from outside the zone into the zone through a transfer station and then to the waste management location.
Mr. Mayor, that is certainly my understanding, but I am not an expert in this business. We do have solid waste staff with us, and we do have the engineer who has spoken quite extensively on this from Waste Management as to how they can assure us from their auditing and their business practices that the service area will be respected. I know that Bill Mcdonald is on here, Mr. Mayor, if you would like to hear from him on that point.
Sure, go ahead. Just unmute.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is Bill McDonough with Waste Management. We have a couple ways that we verify those volumes. On an annual basis, we have a report that's prepared by a third party that comes in and looks at our volumes. On a daily basis, what we call our gatehouse software, the software that tracks the waste that comes into both our transfer stations and our landfills, notes the location of where the waste came from. So whether it's either from a transfer trailer or whether it's from a route truck coming in, the driver of that vehicle has to tell where that waste is coming from, either by city or by county. It's not something that's widely used in Ontario, but it is used. I do know that it's widely used in Michigan because in Michigan, waste has to be tracked between counties and authorized between counties. So our software tracks that and it is audible. So we know where the waste comes from. Is it possible for somebody to sneak it in? Sure, someone can always sneak something in, but we watch for that. Our gate people are conscious that they need to know who the customer is when they're coming in and what the source is. If they don't know, they'll verify it. So I feel we have an acceptable system for tracking the waste.
All right, thank you for that. And then just the final thing I had, just on and perhaps this comes up next year when we talk about the monetary aspect of it, but the oddity of Ward 21, and that it's somehow closer to the landfill than Stittsville Ward is. We're both closer and further because for whatever reason, we're north and south of Stittsville. Now we're changing that. That ward boundary changes. Ward 21 now shifts over, and the line, it's no longer directly adjacent to the landfill. Do we recognize that in the agreement in some way? Because I know that Ward 21 is included, but those constituents, those residents, in reality, I happen to represent the people closest to it, just by and the folks that were most impacted by the old rump dump years ago. But they'll shift actually back into West Carleton Ward. So just curious how we address that, or if we recognize that in a future amendment to any agreement, or if it matters at all.
Mr. Chair, the ward is recognized in this agreement under its existing boundaries. This would be something that staff will have to look at in the Q1 2022 report in terms of allocation.
Okay, that's all. Thanks so much.
Yeah, that's a good point, Councillor Moffat. Thank you. Councillor El-Shantiri, please.
I don't have a question for staff, Mr. Mayor. If somebody else have a question, I'd just like to close up with a couple of remarks, if you don't mind.
Okay, does anyone else have questions to staff before we do wrap up? I know Councillor Gower also wants to speak and wrap up. No? Okay, Councillor El-Shantiri, you have the floor.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, colleagues. And as I started earlier, thanking our staff, but really staff has worked on the host agreement since 2015. This agreement had the potential, if waste management operator, to be approved capacity per year to bring the rural area of the city 1.4 million per year for almost 12 years. There is no statutory obligation for waste management to pay the host fee, but they understand the public perception of landfill. No matter how carefully operated, and agree to pay a host fee with zero commitment from the city to subsidize the fee with the city waste. They agree to reduce service area and committed to the production of information to the city, Quebec. But as a result of the ongoing negotiation and pursuit from the city, withdrew that application and made the commitment to the reduced area. So basically, we don't receive garbage from Quebec. I know landfill aren't a popular enterprise, but the province say we have a continued need for them. And that means they have to go onto municipality. And we saw the result in the EA. They had approved with every condition they had asked for, and we had zero from the province. So where the I know this landfill will provide job in the area, and they also provide in the outside of the host agreement a new lane on Carp Road to assist with the truck traffics, which is benefit cost in proximity $1 million. All the staff are not material as a part of the host. So basically that $1 million over and above. I'm not making it sound, oh, we get everything we want, but I believe we got everything we can negotiate for. And if we walk away, like somebody suggested, if we don't approve this host agreement, that means will be no landfill. Well, make no mistake, they can appeal that and they can receive approval without any condition, and we will be without a host agreement. So am I happy to have a landfill in my ward? I asked that question many years ago. Does any one of my colleagues wants to have that landfill in their own ward? And I didn't see one hand go up at the time. I know the ministry has set a term of monitoring and ensuring waste management as meeting their approval standard. I'm also satisfied with the agreement that doesn't bind the city like we have seen in some other contract for years. This is a reasonable amount of money coming onto the city, and we cannot try to inflate amount arbitrarily. And I know I heard some of my residents say, why don't you ask for more here? It's easy to sit on the outside, and we've been negotiating for 6 years to get to this point. And surely to God, I'd rather not sit and negotiate a landfill expansion. But if we have to have a landfill, I like to have those terms and conditions come with it, and make sure we hold the operations feet to the fire and making sure it'll maintain a clean operation without traffic jam on Carp Road. So, colleague, this is your vote today is not on the life of the landfill. It's not about waste. It's about a host agreement, legal binding with the company. And that's what we'll be voting on. And I hope I can receive your support on this. And I want to say thank you to Ms. Inta, because till 5 to 11 last night, she was still in communication with me on a long weekend. I want to thank to all staff for their support and answering the question to all of us. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I want to thank the member of the PLC. I know it's not all councillors on a committee. Some of them are residents of our catchment area. And the committee will be meeting on a regular basis from here on when the operation kicks back, and we will be posting our minute. We didn't post the last minute because there was in-camera meeting, Mr. Mayor, and we heard about it why it was not posted. That was an in-camera meeting between the city's legal and the councillor and the committee member. So with that, I want to say thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to all my colleagues, especially the one on the PLC and the member of the community who sat on the PLC. It's been a long journey to get to this day. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, and thanks for your leadership. Councillor Gower, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to thank the committee for allowing the time that we've spent on this today. It is a very important issue for residents in Stittsville and the other wards in the area. It's a bit of a sleeping giant. A lot of the people who live in Stittsville now moved in after the current landfill operation stopped operating. So I've had some people ask me, what's that ski hill over on the other side of the Queensway? A lot of people don't even know that this is a landfill. And so I know when it begins operating again with the additional truck traffic and the impact from the waste being collected, it's going to continue to be a big concern for the community. I was struggling a bit if there was a direction or a motion that I could make in recognition of the role of the Public Liaison Committee. I was struggling, is there a direction to staff we could do, but the Public Liaison Committee isn't a responsibility of staff. And I think as the 5 councillors who are a member of the public committee in this area. So the Public Liaison Committee, it's the 5 local councillors, it's 4 members of the public and a representative from Waste Management. This committee has not met regularly because the landfill has not been in operation. But once it does start operating, this will be a very important committee to ensure transparency and accountability around the landfill's operation. And I'm not going to direct staff to change the operations because it's on us as committee members to make sure that we're improving the transparency and accountability that Public Liaison Committee is supposed to bring. So for example, for regular meetings, making sure that minutes are published, agendas are published. For the monitoring, groundwater monitoring and odor monitoring, that committee receives information reports for information and comment only, but we should be finding a mechanism to share that information with the public in electronic form. Even the annual reports from the landfill are usually only provided in paper format. That's not very accessible for our residents. So I just want to ask to my fellow Public Liaison Committee members who are here today, we need to make sure that we're improving the openness and transparency of that committee so that the public has greater confidence and awareness of that Waste Management and the province are living up to the requirements that they have under the provincial environmental approval. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Great, thank you. Anyone else wish to speak? No. So on.
No, small clarification, Mr. Mayor, to my colleague, because I don't want this to be out there in the public. The report the council's talking about, the annual report, that's a ministry annual report. That's not a Waste Management and it's not PLC. We receive it in a book folder and we pass it among ourselves as a PLC member when we need, but that's not really the PLC's report and it's not even Waste Management report. The ministry, that's how they choose, and they said any comment, you can send it to the ministry directly. So I just want to make sure, and I said it Councilor Gower, as a committee, once the operations start go back in the landfill, yes, we need to meet on a more regular basis and more, with a better website to inform the community of those meetings. But right now, why would you have a meeting when we haven't had anything in the last 5 years, basically?
Yeah, so this is looking forward. Obviously, there will be significantly more action and work for members of that committee. So I thank them in advance for that. So on the recommendations as presented, carried.
And we have ayes and nays on it, Mr. Mayor.
Sure, yeas and nays have been called.
Conseil Cloutier,
Oui.
Councillor Darouz,
Yes.
Councillor El Shantari,
Yes.
Councillor Gower,
Yes.
Councillor Hubley,
Yes.
Conseiller Luloff,
Oui.
Councillor Moffat,
Yes.
Councillor Sudds, yes,
Councillor Tierney,
Yes.
Vice Chair Dudas,
yes,
Mayor Watson,
Yes,
11 yeas.
thank you. That's carried. Our next item on the agenda is Corporate Diversity and Inclusion Plan municipal pour la diversité et de l'inclusion. We have a presentation from staff. I don't know if Donna or Suzanne are going to do this, but I think this might be Suzanne's first presentation to committee. So congratulations and welcome again. And Donna, do you want to set up the context and then maybe hand it to Suzanne?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. It's my distinct pleasure today to present a summary and update on the progress of the city's corporate diversity and inclusion plan that has been developed by the Equity Secretariat of the Gender and Race Equity, Inclusion, Indigenous Relations, and Social Development Service of Community and Social Services Department. This plan's been built in collaboration with our human resources and in consultation with all city departments and our external stakeholders. I'm joined today with Suzanne Obiora to present the city's plan on behalf of the city manager and the senior leadership team. I'd like to acknowledge the city manager and the senior leadership's leadership in moving this plan forward and the progress we're going to present today, and the work of the Equity Secretariat in development of the report today. I'd like to begin the presentation first by acknowledging that Ottawa is built on unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territory, and that we honor the peoples and land of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation and extend our recognition to all First Nation, Inuit, and Métis peoples for their valuable contributions to this land, and that we continue with our ongoing commitments to maintain the important relationships with our Indigenous partners. The city's strategic plan that was approved by Council in December 2019 established the roadmap to continue the city's journey to build an inclusive workforce that is healthy, diverse, adaptive, and engaged. In January of 2020, the senior leadership team approved the first city corporate diversity and inclusion plan as one of the priorities under the Thriving Workforce strategic priority of Council. Today, we're requesting that committee recommend that Council receive this report for information to champion the citywide implementation of this plan. This plan will initiate the systemic change and cultural transformation that really is at the heart of the plan's objectives to create and sustain a representative workforce and an inclusive workplace. I will now hand the presentation to Suzanne for the details of the plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Donna, for the introduction. I'll just wait. We do have a presentation, Carol, if you can put it up. And I'm pleased to share this is my second time coming to FEDCO. I did do a presentation in June on an update of our anti-racism secretariat. We'll just go to the next slide. So the vision of the plan is that the City of Ottawa strives to set an example to all residents and municipalities across the country, demonstrating its commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion. And it strives to ensure that its workforce is reflective of the population it serves and nurtures a respectful and inclusive culture where all employees experience a sense of belonging. We work with the understanding that building an inclusive workforce ensures that a diversity of minds, experiences, and perspectives are shaping and leading the city's operations and services. And we believe that when all employees experience a sense of belonging, feel socially connected, supported, and appreciated, this translates to high performance, engagement, and confidence in the value an individual brings to their workplace. Next slide, please. We know a diverse workforce enables organizations to build more meaningful and productive relationships with communities, identify and remove barriers preventing equality, leverages the expertise of a diverse range of individuals, and fosters creativity to meet the best needs of staff and our community. Our work is guided by legislative obligations, social responsibilities, a quest for innovation, and an obligation to instill public confidence and accountability. Particularly in the past year, as the social discourse of equity has intensified and the public seeks greater accountability for the workforce to substantively demonstrate the degree to which their workplace embed the principles of equity, diversity, and inclusion. Next slide, please. The city has played a leadership role with the advancement of equity through our Women and Gender Equity Strategy and the development of our Anti-Racism Secretariat. And this plan is another critical component of how the organization transforms to be responsive to the needs of staff and the community. Our plan recognizes that individuals who come from different backgrounds can encounter barriers towards reaching their full potential. Therefore, our strategy is situated in principles of equity to ensure everyone has access to the same opportunities. As such, our approaches are attentive to Indigenous sovereignty, systemic racism, intersectional identities, and the need to listen, hear, and act. Next slide, please. Our plan's strategic objective is to create and maintain a representative workforce and inclusive workplace through three collective priorities. First, to recruit and hire by enhancing our knowledge and eliminating barriers related to our recruitment and hiring processes. Second, to retain and promote our staff by nurturing a respectful workplace and ensuring equitable opportunities for advancement. And third, to create a culture where people feel safe to self-identify in the workforce census, enabling the city to track, monitor, and report on representation. From these three pillars, we've identified 52 actions that are grounded in evidence-based practices and grouped under the following areas of focus: outreach, recruitment, and hiring, partnerships and engagement, learning and awareness, accountability, governance, and policy review. And these areas of focus are underpinned by data management and workforce analytics to monitor our progress. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So this slide depicts some of our corporate accomplishments since the implementation of our plan. And some notable mentions include the development of the Lead It strategy hiring process, which aims to increase the representation of the city workforce. Lead It stands for Leverage Equity to achieve diversity and inclusion targets. Our outreach and engagement specialist works with local educational institutions and community agencies to attract potential candidates that are underrepresented within our workforce. Our outreach efforts have translated into recognition by the Canada Centre for Diversity and Inclusion, where the city received an award of success for our 2019 Career Showcase. The city fosters partnerships with numerous stakeholders, such as the Employment Accessibility Resource Network and the Ottawa Local Immigration Partnership, among many others. And we've implemented internal initiatives like our employee-led affinity groups, which are networks based on social identity, such as gender, race, or faith, to build engagement and foster a sense of belonging. We offer approximately 24 learning modules to raise diversity and inclusion competencies across the corporation. And we understand accountability, governance, and policy are essential in supporting the achievement and sustainability to the plan. As such, a reporting template was created for departments with process and outcome indicators to allow for greater consistency and ease of gathering information. Progress on the plan is then reported on a biannual basis to the senior leadership team to ensure accountability. In addition to our corporate accomplishments, each department have numerous achievements under these 5 areas of focus, some of which are highlighted within our report. Next slide, please. So the next 3 slides that I'll go over depict the results of our Count Me In campaign, which yielded an overall staff response rate of 87%, up 7 percentage points from the last campaign in 2019. This data includes active full-time, part-time, and casually federally casual federally and provincially regulated staff. Our workforce representation is measured against the 2018 Regional Occupational Workforce Availability, which is the share of the Canadian workforce with the skills and competencies available to work within designated occupations. It's these availability rates that the city has used to establish our 2024 workforce representation targets for the 4 employment equity groups. Our occupational workforce targets are visually represented here in gray, and the orange represents our most recent data, while the blue bar represents our starting point at the onset of the plan. And so across the corporation, the data is encouraging, with the representation of Indigenous peoples, members of visible minorities, and persons with disabilities trending upwards across all staff. We do see a slight decrease of a 0.7 percentage point for women. One thing that I'll mention is that in this slide, you see the workforce representation across the corporation. But our workforce targets for each employment equity group will vary by department as they are established based on occupational availability. So for example, across the corporation, we have a target of 43.3% representation of women. However, within community and social services, where most occupations are often held by women, the workforce availability target for women is around 70%, while in finance, we'll see it's at about 50%, and transport, it's 20%. And I just offer this distinction to provide some important contextual piece. Next slide, please. So here our response rate for management was 95%, and we see significant rise in the representation for persons with disabilities, surpassing our target, which may be attributed to the broader definition of visible and non-visible disabilities. Our representation for women also surpassed the workforce availability targets, and we see opportunities to increase our diversity of management for Indigenous peoples and members of visible minorities. And we're currently applying an equity lens on our succession planning to support diversification of management staff. Next slide, please. For the extended senior leadership team, we received a 100% response rate, and to continue to see an upward trend for 3 of the 4 employment equity groups. The area in which we need to concentrate our efforts is in promotion and executive recruitment among our Indigenous leaders. So in addition to the 4 employment equity groups, the city recognizes the wide range of diversity within its workforce. And so we also collect and track workforce representation of immigrants, newcomers, and those who identify within the 2S LGBTQIA+ community. And as part of our workforce analytics, we will be drilling down further to understand the intersectionality representation of our staff, so that we are able to measure and understand overlapping identities, such as the number of Indigenous women or someone who is a newcomer, visible minority living with disabilities. Next slide, please. But to support the sustainability of the plan, we will continue to provide strategic advice and oversight, and we will use an outcomes-based approach with a focus on tracking, measuring, and reporting our progress twice per year to the senior leadership team and regularly to council. Our value for equity, diversity, and inclusion is demonstrated through our city strategic plan, our corporate diversity and inclusion plan, our policies, celebrations, promotional activities, and more, all of which guide the operations of programs and services and influence our corporate culture to benefit Ottawa residents and city staff. We will continually seek to identify opportunities to amplify the impacts of our efforts, with examples as noted on this slide. And we are pleased to have shared some highlights of the Corporate Diversity and Inclusion Plan and recommend that Council receive this report for information. This brings us to the end of our presentation. I too would like to thank our senior leadership team, leadership from the FEDCO members and Council, and also to thank the incredible and tireless efforts of our staff.
Any hands?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Suzanne. That was a very thorough presentation and some very good news and some areas that we have to work on. So I appreciate that. Questions to staff? We have Councillor Ralston-King, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I would like to thank Donna and Suzanne and the rest of the Equity Secretariat staff for the work that has been undertaken in developing and providing this corporate diversity and inclusion plan before this committee. As noted in the excellent in-depth report, the report really does quantify the gaps between our city's diverse population and identifiable employment equity groups. While the report notes that the city is trending upwards towards meeting its employment equity workforce representational targets by 2024, there are still within the interim substantive representational gaps, especially amongst management. So I was wondering if staff could outline the work that's being undertaken to really address this gap. And I know that staff did mention that there is some work around promotions and advancement. So that's my first question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So recognizing that diversity representation at the management levels is essential to achieving a representative workforce, there are a number of initiatives in place. So these include our Lead It strategic hiring process, which again is leveraging equity to achieve diversity and inclusion targets. And this currently focuses on strategic hiring for our external and management professional positions. We've started to pilot this strategic hiring process among 4 of our departments. And our goal or our intention is for this program to be expanded across the organization in 2022. We are also building equity, diversity, and inclusion directly into the succession management process by including specific questions regarding diverse experiences and barriers to movement in our career planning conversations, and identifying members within equity seeking groups who are interested in stretch opportunities and advancement within their career. We are updating our equity and inclusion lens and related training, which looks at many key concepts required for inclusion, including issues regarding systemic barriers and how we can work to address these. And this training will be offered monthly beginning in 2022. And we're working with the Learning Center on diversifying our executive leadership program. And then beginning this month, bias awareness training for leaders will be offered, and similar training for staff will be available shortly thereafter. And our intention is that these trainings will create greater awareness and considerations around the application and HR lifecycle for diverse candidates.
Well, I appreciate that answer, and I appreciate the amount of work that's being undertaken, especially around the potential for promotions. As we know, around the council table, there will be a number of senior management positions that will need renewal. And so it's important that we have a structural framework in place really to address that and to ensure that there's greater employment equity, especially at the senior management level. The last question I had was really asking you to describe the community outreach work that is underway or that is being contemplated in order to expand employment equity across the board through the city's workplace, especially to Indigenous, Black, racialized communities, along with persons with disabilities. I know, it's often a battle for many within city staff, obviously, to rise, but it's also a battle simply to get into the city as a workplace. So I was just curious if you can outline your community outreach efforts, since that is of a great concern to many, especially in the Black and racialized communities in Ottawa.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So we consult extensively with both external and internal stakeholders. As it relates to our community engagement, we work very closely with our Community Champions Table Network, which is a network of community members representing diverse organizations and groups. I think our membership is close to 22 community organizations and groups who meet with us regularly to provide us with feedback and insight on our plan as it relates to recruitment initiatives, particularly in areas where we wish to improve our representation. And so we also consult with public members of diverse communities as it relates to our to informing our women and gender equity strategy, as well as our anti-racism strategy, as both of those strategies cross-cut into employment equity for diverse groups. So what I would like to note as it relates to our community champion networks table is the representation does include organizations that have mandates to serve Indigenous, Black, racialized individuals, as well as those living with disabilities, newcomers, members of the 2S LGBTQ community, etc. And we continue to explore additional methods to reach out to a wider audience of stakeholders who can teach us on how we can engage differently. And so this includes going to meet people where they are at community associations, groups, faith-based establishments, or community health and resource centers to advertise and share job opportunities with the city. We then have a host of initiatives and workshops that we offer to help with advancing recruitment of various employment equity groups. And that might be as it relates to job applications, conducting mock interviews, hosting information sessions, and really targeting our outreach strategies to various communities in an effort to increase their success in securing work with the City of Ottawa, and also to identify the barriers that exist in the application process as it relates to securing work with the city.
Well, I'm pleased that all that work is underway, especially addressing barriers. We hear it all the time from community members that they want to ensure that they can surpass the barriers that are put in their way, so that they can actively contribute to the city through its workforce by providing services. So I'm very pleased to see the progress that is being made in terms of this diversity and inclusion plan around employment equity. We heard very clearly from many segments of the city's diverse population that they wanted to see a movement on employment equity. And I believe that there will be a great opportunity, especially at the senior management table, with the senior management team in the near future, for us to see some more diversity and some more diversification in the senior management ranks. So I really do appreciate the report and the work that you've done. And thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Great. Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor El-Shantiri, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Suzanne, for your presentation, and also for taking the time last week also to meet with FEDCO members. And I asked you that question, and so I'm sure you prepared for. What I'm looking for more than anything, and I heard all these questions from my colleague, Councillor King, but I'm looking for the measure of success. So the measure of success sometimes is not with just increase the number. The success, in my opinion, is the one we can accommodate and they stay, because in the past, some studies show that the majority of people leave the workforce, doesn't matter whether city, government, police, other, is from women and visible minorities. So when would you bring it back to this committee and council the measuring stick? Like, how would you be measuring the success?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If I might first start off with speaking a little bit about inclusion at the city, because the objective of our strategic plan is to have a workforce that is reflective of Ottawa residents, but it's also to ensure that we're fostering a workplace that is inclusive and offers a sense of belonging for employees. And so when employees are expressing positive experiences around receiving fair treatment, the integration of differences, being involved in decision-making, psychological safety, trust, and seeing diversity in the organization. These are measures of inclusion that helps first and foremost to foster that sense of belonging and potentially prevent early exit within the organization. I think when it comes to the work of equity, the journey doesn't have an endpoint, but what quantifies as progress is the achievement of the collective priorities that are set out in the plan. And so part of that is very much around the data that links to who is employed at the city. It also looks to, how have we improved entry points to acquire jobs within the city, and what does the data demonstrate as it relates to upwards mobility of diversity of staff? It looks at high retention rates and employee satisfaction, and are employees able to articulate those indicators of inclusion that I mentioned earlier, and seeing the impact and value that's recognized in the community as it relates to how we're allocating funding, community partnerships that we're fostering, progress that we're making as it relates to economic development, vibrance and priority neighborhoods. These are some examples of metrics of success. In addition, looking at what we're hearing from our Affinity groups as it relates to employee experiences, what behaviors we're seeing change as it relates to bias awareness training or anti-racism training, and how confident our leadership is in equity, diversity, and inclusion competencies and conversations that they engage in with staff. So these are some of the measures of what we feel to be progress and success that we would be reporting back to Council.
Councillor El-Shantiri.
Thank you for that, Mr. Mayor. But also, Suzanne, some of the collective agreement also sometimes come to play with the accommodation. Have we worked with the union leadership? Whether I know you're focused on the city, which is we're still focused on the city. Has that discussion been in place for the collective agreement?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have engaged in conversations with labor relations and the unions on the strategic objectives of our corporate diversity and inclusion plan. And as I had shared earlier, our priority is around the diversification within our management and professional exemption positions, which are outside of the union.
Okay, thank you, Suzanne, and thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Don. Job well done.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Kavanaugh, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Suzanne, for all your work. We met earlier, and I'm really impressed with how far we're coming so fast. It's been a couple of years since we just got these things going, and already we're making progress. And I appreciate the use of data, the tracking, which I think is a first, if I'm not mistaken, for us. Is that not correct, Suzanne? In terms of just tracking where we are right now in terms of our diversity. Is that an important part of this?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have been capturing data, but this is the first time that we have established targets or benchmarks. And these are targets or benchmarks as it relates to the availability of employment equity groups for designated occupations, and have established a goal in an effort to reach these targets by 2024.
Thank you. And as the council representative on gender and equity, I appreciate the intersectionality that is necessary as well for this to happen. It's not just about the diversity in terms of other classifications, but there's a lot of intersectionality happening where you can you can be obviously a woman and be part of a group, a diverse group. And how is it that we're working in terms of encouraging more participation for becoming part of our workforce?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And so one of the initiatives that we've launched are the employee-led affinity groups. And we currently have 9 employee-led affinity groups that are network spaces based on social identity that help with encouraging staff and allies to come together and learn and discuss issues and concerns and particular initiatives of interest to them. And that's part of our work as it relates to inclusion. We're also really publicizing and observing cultural and commemorative days to help people with having a sense of history and valued contributions and belonging within the organization. At present, we are collecting self-identification data for 6 groups: Indigenous, members of visible minorities, persons with disabilities, gender, the 2S LGBTQA, and newcomers. And these can be reported so that we measure intersections such as Indigenous women or visible minority living with a disability, though we do not have established comparators of workforce availability for these intersectional components. It still gives us a very good indication of our workplace demographic from an intersectional lens. And we are also moving to collect disaggregate data, which will allow us to capture specific ethnicities under the umbrella term visible minorities, and will allow us to further specify, for example, how many African Canadian Black employees are at the city in leadership positions.
Thank you. I think a lot of people are looking at the position that's going to be coming vacant on September 30th and wondering how we can apply this to that position, and that's the Transportation General Manager. How will these policies affect the hiring for that position?
So, Mr. Mayor, I'm not able to speak specifically to the upcoming GM position in transportation, but will continue to speak to the work of our Lead It strategic hiring process that looks to articulate a step-by-step process to prioritize the hiring of employee equity designated candidates who rank highest in meeting all competencies. Our Lead It strategic hiring process also has another stream that allows managers to identify positions to be filled by members of employment equity groups based on occupational requirements in job descriptions or based on significant gaps in workforce representation.
Thank you. When I look at, our managements, many of them started, at different positions, just coming in as apprentices or whatever, and working their way up. They've worked their way through the system. And I think that it requires a lot of patience on our part, but are we encouraging more apprentice programs? This is more a Donna Gray question, because I've mentioned this before about the need to work with communities on offering more apprentice programs so that we can have those people in place, so we have more opportunities.
I wonder, Mr. Mayor, if you'd like me to start, and Donna may chip in. We are working with human resources to ensure outreach for positions, and we do have a variety of apprenticeships and internships that we offer. So we're involved in various programs designed to diversify our city's workforce. An example of that would be our Youth Futures, which is a bilingual program that strives to create equitable opportunities for youth by providing training, mentorship, and work experience. We also maintain strong partnerships with Indigenous community partners who work with youth, and we participate in their events as it relates to leadership and in coaching. I mentioned earlier that we're offering quite a bit of outreach and recruitment initiatives to help potential candidates with applying online at the city. And we also sit on the Employee Assistance and Resource Network Steering Committee and participate regularly in their job matching sessions to help people living with disabilities seek employment here with the city. We do have outreach and engagement specialists as well as HR specialists that work with departments to link candidates to various apprenticeship opportunities here with the city. And this is something that we're continuing looking to explore to help with diversifying our workforce. I will also mention that we work with executive search companies that really have that equity, diversity, inclusion lens as part of that process and understand our priorities and ensuring that our leadership is reflective of the Ottawa community.
I appreciate that. I think it would be helpful to talk to councillors about encouraging people to apply for these programs, because we certainly know people in our communities and different groups. I know you work with a lot of different groups, but I certainly can see neighborhoods and communities that would be very, very interested, and I don't know where to send them at this point. And I think it'll help us encourage the growth of those programs if we can make sure that we have lots of good applications. My last question, I'm probably stealing thunder from Councillor Fleury, but I just want to ask about bilingualism. If we're ensuring as well that when we have new candidates, ils sont bilingues aussi.
Merci, Monsieur le Maire. Et oui, on essaie d'assurer que nos postes disponibles sont bilingues. The city's equity and inclusion lens has recognized the experiences of Francophone community as an important consideration towards equity. And while Francophones are not designated as an employment equity group, as of 2020, 16% of our city jobs are designated bilingual, as we recognize Francophones are an important group. And we also appreciate that the Francophone community is embedded throughout all of the employment equity groups. What we will be looking at in terms of our data collection measurements, again, as it relates to intersectionality, is understanding the Francophone representation within our equity deserving groups.
Merci.
We also have many organizations within our community champion table network that represent Francophone organizations.
Thank you. I know that there's a larger group that's growing of Francophone Black community that is growing in Ottawa in terms of immigration from countries in Africa, for example. And I think there's a lot of great growth there and lots of potential of wonderful candidates. So j'espère qu'ils sont inclus dans le programme aussi. Merci beaucoup, Suzanne et Donna.
Thank you. Merci. Councillor Fleury, please.
Merci, Monsieur le maire. Et puis, oui, merci, Donna et Suzanne, pour le rapport. Je pense que c'est important d'avoir les bonnes assises pour planifier l'avenir de l'équipe de la ville. On a tout près de 17 000 employés, donc c'est important d'avoir un regard sur certaines de nos approches, certaines de nos failles, puis des opportunités que l'on a dans notre communauté. Suzanne, toi et moi, dans le passé, on a eu des discussions au sujet des forces de la ville quand on regarde les services sociaux, quand on regarde les services récréatifs, mais on reconnaît aussi certaines failles. Puis, je sais que les ressources humaines ont essayé à certains égards de faciliter les conversations. Moi, ma question est un petit peu épineuse, c'est comment on fait dans une institution où les objectifs centrales sont clairs, mais les objectifs sont décentralisés, où chacun des groupes doit atteindre ces objectifs-là. Je sais que tout à l'heure, conseillère Kavanagh parlait du bilinguisme, mais je pense que la diversité, c'en est un autre élément. Je vais te donner deux exemples clés, peut-être de référence. On sait que parmi les services de pompiers, c'est une des difficultés. Là. On reconnaît un besoin là, de rééquilibre à ce niveau-là. On voit d'autres groupes où, par exemple, au C-Transpo, les chauffeurs, c'est très diversifié, mais au niveau de l'administration, c'est encore très homme blanc. Donc, moi, je suis intrigué de, oui, on a les bonnes assises, mais comment on fait pour amener un objectif corporatif dans les modèles décentralisés, là, comme les différents départements?
Merci, Monsieur le maire. J'ai une réponse pour vous. Malheureusement, si vous me permettrez, j'aimerais répondre en anglais.
Oui, pas de problème. Allez-y.
Et j'ai pris des notes au niveau de nos plans et comment on essaie d'avoir une approche pendant toute la coopération et en plus comment chaque département a leur propre approche au niveau de leur plan. Et je pense que je viens de trouver maintenant. So I was explaining earlier that the city is introducing a strategic hiring process that aims to attract and prioritize candidates. And we were looking at how we had seen a slight a decrease in women representation. And I was giving context that, you know, within certain departments like community social services, we'll see higher workforce availability for women because many of these occupations are generally staffed by women. The city is paying attention to occupations that are traditionally occupied perhaps by males and where women still face systemic barriers. So departments are paying attention to where gaps exist and create their individual diversity departmental plans in an effort to identify and then address those barriers. And in addition to what the city is looking at as it relates, what departments looking at as it relates to barriers to increasing representation for women, for example, within their area is the outreach that they're doing with educational systems to promote women in some of these non-traditional careers. So some specific examples include the Women in Uniform program, a partnership with Algonquin College. And other departments have participated in conferences within the sector to address gender-specific issues and continue to engage with community to encourage the hiring of women in some of these positions that are non-traditionally held by women. In addition, our women and gender equity strategy is looking very much at employment representation. One of our strategic priorities is that representation in some of the departments where we're seeing gaps. So there is a corporate responsibility as it relates to the plan, but each department has their unique plans that they're implementing to address specific culture and gaps that may exist within their department.
Thank you for the detailed response. Just in terms of clarity, say if you find in a group, I'll give you an example, winter sidewalk plows for public works. It's one group where you see a lot of it's part-time work, right? And you come in. What can your group and the fundamentals that we've put in place influence those uptake? Because there seems to be kind of a cookie cutter hiring model for some of the groups that generate the same outcome. So I'm curious to understand how the corporate goals get into, the reporting is one structure, and we hope that that will give us good data. But when we recognize particular groups where there are challenges, is it you? Is it HR? Like, what's the intervention with the various departments?
Yeah, so thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have outreach and recruitment specialists in addition to diversity and equity specialists that work with departments to identify and tailor interventions unique to those departments. So the reporting helps us with being accountable to our plan, but the interventions are very much tailored to the barriers, the culture, the understanding of the department-specific work environment. So we really try to pay attention to what are the gaps, what are the opportunities, who best to outreach as it relates to specific occupations. And that's where our diversity and equity specialists, in addition to our outreach specialists, will work with departments to help them with the advancement of their plan. And this can range from...
Oh, sorry about that, Stan. You froze on.
No, I was just going to say, some of this can range from, training programs targeted for women to some of the partnerships that we're holding with Indigenous organizations, to some of the cultural and learning events that we're offering to help with broadening understanding of difference and to help with broadening a culture within various departments.
I'd like to make, and thank you for that, I'd like to make two suggestions for you and the team to consider. With my background in Parks and Rec, I know how many university and college students pick up a gig at the front desk of a community center or an arena or a pool or so on. And I wonder if that workforce doesn't necessarily know what's available or what sort of employment's available within the city. So, and that's often very diverse group that comes in through their studies. And then the other element to me would be a little more centralized. I think you spoke to Councillor King earlier about information and how we share information with various cultural groups. And I would think that sometimes it's how we do our postings that seems complicated. If you have a driver's license, sometimes you can pick up a really good offering at the city. So just leaving you with those food for thoughts going forward. And I want to thank you. I think the fundamentals are now in place, and I know it's exciting for many of the employees at the city who see the importance of the city, recognizing the changing face of Ottawa, and that's exciting for all of us. So thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Est-ce qu'il y a des autres questions, commentaires? No, thank you very much, Suzanne and Donna. On the item, received. Notices a motion for consideration of subsequent meeting. David's motion. Any written inquiries, Madam Clerk?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Other business? Adjournment. The meeting is adjourned. Our next meeting is the 5th of October. La prochaine réunion est le 5 octobre. Meeting adjourned. Thank you all very much. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.